I have stood on 40 battlefields. I have watched stars fall on worlds whose names I never learned to say right. And in all that time, in all those years of carrying a rank I never asked for, I only ever saw one thing that I could not explain. It was not a weapon, it was not a fleet, it was a child. A small, dirty human child with a voice no louder than a whisper. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start the way the day started. Quiet. Too quiet if I am honest, though I did not know it yet. My name is Sail Voth. In the old tongue of my people, the Tessari, that name means something close to one who listens before the storm. My mother chose it. She was not a soldier. She used to say the universe gives you a name and then spends your whole life testing whether you can live up to it. I used to laugh at that. I do not laugh at it anymore. Back then I served the conquered. If you have never heard of the conquered, count yourself lucky. We were not the kind of empire that put up statues of itself. We were the kind that arrived, took what was useful and left the rest in the dust. We called it order. The worlds we took called it something else, in languages we did not bother to learn. I was a containment officer. That is a clean word for a dirty job. My work was the things the conquered built to win wars but could not always control once the wars were over. Living things. Engineered things. Animals that had been pulled apart and put back together until they were no longer animals, until they were closer to machines wearing flesh. We had a name for them in the field reports. Bioassets. Nobody who actually worked with them used that word. The handlers, the loaders, the ones who carried the burns and the scars, we called them what they were. Warbeasts. And the one I am going to tell you about was the worst of them, the last of its line, the one even the conquered was afraid of. It did not have a name. The conquered did not give names to its weapons. It had a designation. A string of letters and numbers that I will not bore you with because by the end of that day the designation did not matter. Nothing on the official records mattered. Only the word mattered, the single word. But I am getting ahead of myself again. Forgive me. I am old now, and old men cannot tell a story straight to save their lives. Let me tell you about the depot. We were stationed on a world the conquered had numbered and never bothered to name. A staging world. A way station. Somewhere between the front and the rear, where things were stored that nobody at the center wanted to look at too closely. The sky there was the color of old bruises, yellow fatting into gray, and the wind never stopped. It came across the flats in long, low moans, picking up the red dust and dragging it against the prefab walls until everything you owned tasted faintly of iron. There was no rain on that world. There was only the wind and the dust and the cold that came at night and crept into your joints and stayed there. I remember the cold most of all. Strange, the things a memory keeps. The depot was a sprawl of gray containment domes and loading yards and hangar tunnels dug down into the rock. Above it all hung the gantries and the cranes, dark against that bruised sky, swaying when the wind got bad. There were maybe 3,000 of us posted there. Soldiers mostly. Handlers like me, engineers, a scattering of the conquered's gene techs, the ones in the pale coats who never quite looked you in the eye. And there were prisoners. I should be honest about that because if I am going to tell you the truth, I have to tell you all of it. The conquered did not run its depots on volunteer labor. The hard work, the dangerous work, the work nobody with a choice would do, that was done by the conquered. Humans mostly on that world. Humans from a system the conquered had broken 3 years before. I did not think much about them then. I am not proud of that. They were just figures in gray, moving carts and hauling crates in the loading yards, heads down, hands raw. You learn not to look at them too long. Looking too long was how you started asking questions, and asking questions was how you ended up in a gray uniform of your own. I tell you this so you understand who I was. Not a hero, not a villain, just a man doing a job he had stopped letting himself feel anything about. That was the kind of man I was, the morning the Warbeast woke up. It came in on a heavy transport in the dark before dawn. I remember being pulled out of my bunk by the duty signal, the harsh triple tone that meant A priority asset was inbound. I remember dressing in the cold with my breath fogging in front of my face, and cursing whoever decided these things always had to arrive at the worst hour. By the time I got out to the receiving yard, the transport had already set down. It was enormous. One of the old siege haulers, scorched black down one side from some battle it had survived and others had not. The kind of ship you did not see anymore, because the wars that needed them were supposed to be over. The ramp came down with a hiss of pressure and a gout of stale, recycled air, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. I have smelled a lot of bad things in my life: burned flesh, coolant fires, the particular sweetness of a battlefield 3 days after, but the smell that came down that ramp was something I had never met before and have never forgotten since. It was the smell of something alive that should not have been. Musk and ozone and old blood, and underneath it all something chemical, something engineered, the smell of a thing that had been made instead of born. My second in command was a younger officer named Dren Call. Good soldier, steady hands. He stood next to me at the bottom of the ramp, and I watched his face change as the smell hit him. "What is that?" he said. It was not really a question. "That," I said, "is our new problem." The containment unit came down the ramp on a Grafsuld, and the whole yard went quiet to watch it. Even the wind seemed to drop. The unit was a slab of dark alloy the size of a small building, ringed with emitter coils and warning glyphs, every surface scarred and dented from the inside. Let me say that again, because it took me a moment to understand it myself. The dents were on the outside, but they had been made from the inside. Something in that box had spent its journey trying to get out, and it had nearly succeeded. There was a viewing slit on the side of the unit, narrow, reinforced, the kind of glass that could stop a plasma round. I should not have looked. Everything in my training told me not to look. But I am Tessari, and we are a curious people, and I walked up to that slit and I looked. And the Warbeast looked back at me. I will try to describe it, though words are poor things for what I saw. It was huge, that was the first thing. Huge in a way that made the containment unit feel suddenly thin. It was built low and broad, like something meant to move fast and hit hard. 4 heavy limbs folded under a body of slate-gray hide plated with bone the color of old ivory. Where the hide showed, it was crossed with scars, ridges of them, layered so thick that in places the original skin was gone entirely. It had a head like a wedge, and along its spine ran a row of vents that pulsed faintly with heat, the residue of whatever furnace the Conquered's techs had built into it. They had made it to burn, to run into the worst of a battle and burn it down and keep going. But none of that is the part I remember. The part I remember is the eyes. I expected rage. I had handled enough engineered things to know what rage looks like in a made creature, the blind, churning fury of something built only to destroy. That is what I braced for. That is what the Conquered wanted after all. But that is not what I saw. I saw something tired, something that had been hurt so many times it had stopped expecting anything else. The eyes that met mine through that slit were a deep amber, ringed with old burns, and they were not the eyes of a weapon. They were the eyes of a creature that had been turned into a weapon, which is a very different thing, and the difference is the whole story. For a long moment we simply looked at each other, the Warbeast and I. The wind picked up again behind me. Somewhere in the yard a crane groaned, and in that moment I had the strangest thought, a thought no Conquered officer was ever supposed to have. I thought, I am sorry. I do not know why. It came up out of somewhere underneath all the training and the rank and the years of not letting myself feel anything, and it surprised me so badly that I stepped back from the slit, and the moment broke. Dren was watching me. "You all right, sir?" "Fine," I said. My voice did not sound fine. "Get it secured, Dome 7, full lockdown, and get me whatever paperwork came with it. I want to know what we are dealing with." The paperwork, when it came, told me almost nothing useful and everything important. Most of it was redacted, black bars where the truth should have been. But between the bars, I pieced together a shape of a story. The thing in Dome 7 had been part of a program the Conquered had quietly shut down. A program to build the perfect war animal, something with the strength of the old beasts and the obedience of a machine. Generations of them had been made and tested and discarded. This was the last, the only one that had survived its own creation. And it had a problem from the Conquered's point of view. It would not obey. Oh, it would fight. The reports made that very clear. It had been deployed twice, and both times it had done exactly what it was built to do, and the casualty figures on the enemy side were the kind that made generals smile. But it would not stop fighting when ordered to. It would not return to containment when called. The handlers who had tried to control it were listed in the report too, in a section I had to read twice to believe. 11 of them. 11 handlers across 2 years. All dead. Not all killed by the beast, to be fair. Some had simply quit or transferred, or in one case taken their own life rather than go back into the dome. But the message of that list was clear enough. No one could control the Warbeast. 11 of the Conquered's best had tried, with every tool and technique the Empire had, and every one of them had failed. And now it was mine. I sat in my quarters that first night with the wind howling against the walls and the cold creeping up through the floor, and I read that report 3 times, and I will tell you honestly, I was afraid. Not the sharp fear of battle, the kind that comes and goes. A deep, slow fear, the kind that settles in your chest and makes a home there. Because I understood what was being asked of me. The Conquered did not send a problem like this to a depot to be solved. It sent it there to be ended. And it sent it to me because 11 better officers had already died trying, and I was simply next in line. I did not sleep much that night. I kept thinking about the eyes, about that thought I should never have had. I am sorry. The next morning, I went down to Dome 7. Dome 7 sat at the far edge of the depot, half buried in the rock, ringed with the heaviest containment field we had. Inside, the Warbeast prowled. You could not see it from outside, but you could feel it. The whole structure seemed to hum with its presence, a low vibration that came up through your boots and into your teeth. The control room overlooked the containment floor through a wall of that thick reinforced glass. When I came in, the room was full of people who clearly did not want to be there. Engineers, 2 of the pale-coated gene techs, a squad of soldiers in heavy armor, plasma weapons charged, standing along the back wall with the particular stillness of people who have been told a thing might try to kill them. And down on the floor of the dome, behind the field, the Warbeast paced. It moved better than something that size had any right to. There was a grace to it, a terrible economy, every step placed and silent. As I watched, it reached the wall of its enclosure, turned and paced back and turned again. Back and forth, back and forth. The packing of something that has been caged so long the cage has become the only world it knows. Officer Voth, one of the gene techs, approached me, a thin, pale creature with the flat, affectless voice they all seem to share. We are ready to begin the obedience trials whenever you give the order. Obedience trials, I repeated. We have prepared a sequence of command protocols, neural, chemical, and physical, 8 phases. If the asset responds to none of them, the recommendation is termination. And how many phases did the previous handlers get through? The tech paused. For just a moment, something that might have been discomfort crossed that flat face. None, officer. The asset has never completed phase 1. I looked down at the Warbeast packing, back and forth, back and forth. Begin, I said, because what else was I going to say? I was a Conquered officer, and the Conquered had given me an order, and I had spent 20 years not asking questions. I wish I could tell you the trials worked. They did not. I will not walk you through all 8 phases, because most of them were ugly, and some of them I am ashamed to have stood and watched. The neural commands, beamed into the dome on frequencies tuned to the beast's engineered mind, did nothing but make it shake its great head as though shaking off flies. The chemical phase, gas vented into the enclosure to force compliance, made it roar. a sound so deep it cracked one of the lesser observation panels and sent two of the engineers staggering back with their hands over their ears. And the physical phase. The physical phase was the worst. They sent in the suppression drones, sleek black things bristling with shock lances, and I watched the Warbeast take them apart. Not in a frenzy. That was the thing that chilled me. It dismantled them with a kind of weary precision, the way you might swat at something that has been bothering you for too long, and when the last drone fell sparking to the floor, the beast simply turned and went back to its packing. Back and forth, back and forth. By the end of it, the control room stank of fear and burnt circuitry, and the gene tech was standing beside me again with that flat voice. The asset has failed all 8 phases. The recommendation stands: termination. Wait, I said. I do not know why I said it. The fear was still in my chest. The smart thing, the safe thing, the thing that would keep me alive and in my rank, was to nod and sign the order and let the dome do what it was built to do. The containment field could be reversed. A pulse of the right intensity would stop the beast's engineered heart in an instant. Clean. Final. No more dead handlers. But I kept seeing those eyes. Give me 3 days, I said. The tech blinked at me. Officer, the protocols are clear. There is no phase 9. Then I will make one. 3 days. If I cannot make any progress, I will sign your order myself. I do not know why they agreed. Perhaps because the alternative meant explaining to the center why a priority asset had been destroyed without exhausting every option. Perhaps because nobody wanted their name on a termination order if there was any chance of a different outcome. The conquered loved its weapons. It only ever destroyed them as a last resort, and only when the destruction could be blamed on someone else. Whatever the reason, I got my 3 days. I sent everyone away, the engineers, the techs, the soldiers. I told them I worked better without an audience, which was a lie. The truth was I could not stand to have them there, watching, recording, turning the thing on the other side of the glass into data. I wanted to be alone with it. I wanted to look at it without anyone looking at me. That first day, I just watched. I pulled a chair up to the glass and I sat there, hour after hour, in the cold and the quiet, and I watched the Warbeast pace. I did not give it commands. I did not threaten it. I did not try anything the 11 handlers before me had tried, because they had tried everything, and they were all dead. And I am many things, but I am not so proud that I think I can succeed where 11 better officers failed by doing exactly what they did. So I did the one thing none of them had thought to do. Nothing. I just sat there, and after a long while, the beast stopped packing. It stopped and it turned its great head and it looked at me through the glass. The same amber eyes, the same terrible tiredness, and we sat there, the two of us, looking at each other across that reinforced glass, and neither of us moved for a very long time. Then slowly, the Warbeast lay down. I want you to understand how strange that was. This was a creature that had killed 11 handlers, that had torn apart a squad of suppression drones an hour before without breaking stride. And now it lay down on the floor of its dome, folded those heavy limbs beneath it, and rested its great scarred head on the ground, and it looked at me. I did not move. I barely breathed. I felt in that moment that something was happening that I did not have the words for, and that any sudden movement would break it. I am not going to hurt you, I said. It was a foolish thing to say. The glass was soundproofed. It could not hear me. And even if it could, why would it understand the language of the empire that had made it into this? But I said it anyway, because I needed to say it, because the words had been sitting in my chest since the moment I first looked through that slit. I am not going to hurt you, I said again, softer. And the Warbeast closed its eyes. I sat with it until the cold drove me out, late that first night. And as I walked back across the dark depot, with the wind moaning across the flats and the dust whispering against the walls, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. I felt awake. The second day, I tried to feed it. The Concord's protocols specified a nutrient slurry pumped into the dome through a feeding port, the kind of thing you would give a machine, not a living creature. The reports noted that the Warbeast often refused it. I understood why. I would have refused it too. So I went to the depot's main kitchens and I requisitioned meat. Real meat, the kind that was supposed to be reserved for officers. The quartermaster looked at me like I had lost my mind, and perhaps I had, but I outranked him and I signed for it, and I carried it down to Dome 7 myself. I did not send it through the feeding port. I want to be clear about the risk I took, because it was a foolish, dangerous risk, and I would not advise anyone to do what I did. I opened the secondary access hatch, the one that led into the airlock between the control room and the containment floor, and I set the meat down just inside the inner door, in plain sight of the beast. And then I stepped back, and I opened the inner door just for a moment, just long enough, and I let it smell what was there. The Warbeast lifted its head. I will not pretend I was not afraid. My hand was on the emergency seal the entire time. If it had charged, I would have had perhaps a second to close that door, and a second is not very long when a thing the size of a transport is coming at you. But it did not charge. It rose slowly, and it came toward the open door, and it stopped just short of the threshold, and it looked at the meat, and then it looked at me. Back and forth. The meat, me. The meat, me. And I understood in that moment what it was asking. It was asking if this was a trick. 11 handlers, 2 years of trials, a lifetime of being hurt by the hands that claimed to control it. Of course it thought it was a trick. Everything had been a trick. Every offering had come with a hook in it. It is not a trick, I said, and I did the most dangerous thing I did in those 3 days. I stepped forward into the open doorway, into the space where the beast could have ended me with a single movement, and I crouched down, and I pushed the meat a little closer to it with my own hand. We were close enough then that I could feel the heat coming off its body, the residue of that engineered furnace inside it. Close enough that I could see, up close, just how many scars there were. Close enough that I could have reached out and touched the great scarred head. I was not that foolish, but I could have. The Warbeast looked at the meat. It looked at me. And then, slowly, carefully, watching me the entire time, it lowered its head and it ate. I stayed crouched there in the doorway and watched it eat, and I felt something break open in my chest, something I had kept locked shut for 20 years, and I am not ashamed to tell you that I wept. Quietly. The way old soldiers weep when they finally let themselves. Because I understood then that the Concord had been wrong. 11 handlers had been wrong. The reports had been wrong. They had all looked at this creature and seen a weapon that would not obey, a problem to be solved, an asset to be controlled or terminated. They had never once asked what it wanted. And what it wanted, I saw now, was the simplest thing in the universe. The thing every living creature wants, no matter how it is made or what it is made for. It wanted to be treated like it mattered. When it had finished, it did not retreat to the far wall as the reports said it always did. It stayed near the door, and after a moment it lay down again, right there at the threshold, near enough that I could have touched it, and it let out a long breath, a great rumbling sigh that I felt more than heard, and it closed its eyes. I stayed with it a while longer. Then I sealed the door gently, and I went back to my quarters, and that night I slept better than I had in years. I thought I had found the answer. I thought in my pride that I had succeeded where 11 others had failed, that I had done it with patience and meat and a few soft words. I thought the 3rd day would be a formality. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about almost everything that 3rd day. Because the 3rd day was the day they brought the prisoners to Dome 7. And the 3rd day was the day I learned that the beast had been waiting, this whole time, for something I could never have given it. It had been waiting for a voice it knew. And that voice belonged to a child. I will tell you about the child and about the single word, and about what happened in Dome 7 on the third day. But I have to tell it carefully, because it is the part that matters most, and because to this day there are people in what is left of the Concord who would call me a liar for telling it at all. So let me catch my breath. Let me pour the cold out of these old bones. And then I will tell you about the morning everything I thought I understood about strength and weapons, and the difference between making a thing obey and making it trust you, came apart in the space of a single word. The third day did not begin the way I wanted it to. I had planned to spend it the way I had spent the second, quietly, slowly, building on whatever fragile thing had grown between me and the creature in Dome 7. I had brought more meat. I had a notion, foolish I know, that by the end of the day I might be able to get it to take food from my hand, not because the Conquered wanted that, because I wanted it, because somewhere in those 2 days I had stopped thinking of the thing behind the glass as an asset and started thinking of it as someone. But I did not get my quiet day, because when I came down to the dome that morning, the gene techs were already there. There were 3 of them this time, not 2, and they were not alone. The thin one who always spoke for the rest, the one I had come to think of as the voice, was standing in the control room with a data slate in his pale hands, and behind him stood a full squad of armored soldiers, and behind them, herded in through the rear access by 2 more guards, stood a line of prisoners. Humans, 8 of them. In the gray of the Concord, their heads down, their hands raw, blinking in the harsh light of the control room as though they had been pulled out of the dark in a hurry. I felt my stomach turn. "What is this?" I said. The voice did not look up from his slate. "An efficiency, Officer Voth. The center has reviewed your request for additional time. They have granted it, but they have also instructed us to run a parallel protocol in case your methods fail." "What protocol?" He looked at me then with those flat eyes. "Live stress testing. The asset was built for combat. We have never observed it in the presence of unarmed prey under controlled conditions. The data could be valuable for future programs." It took me a moment to understand what he was telling me, and when I understood it, the cold that lived in my chest turned to something hotter. They were going to put the prisoners in the dome. They were going to open the inner door, the same door I had crouched in the day before, and they were going to send 8 unarmed human beings onto the floor of Dome 7, and they were going to watch what the Warbeast did to them, and they were going to write it down. For the data, for future programs. I have done many things in my life that I am not proud of. I have stood by while orders were carried out that I knew were wrong. I had built a career out of not asking questions. But there is a line in every man, even a man who has spent 20 years pretending he does not have one, and the voice had just walked me right up to mine. "No," I said. The control room went quiet. "No," the voice tilted his head, the way they did when something did not fit their models. "Officer Voth, this is not a request. The protocol comes from the center. I have command of this dome for 3 days. You agreed to that. The center agreed to that. Until those 3 days are up, nothing happens in Dome 7 without my order, and I am not giving this one." For a moment, I thought it might end there. I outranked him, technically. The chain of command on a depot world is a tangled thing, but in that room, in that moment, the dome was mine. But the voice was not looking at me anymore. He was looking past me at the squad of soldiers along the wall, and I understood that the chain of command was about to be settled the way it always was in the Concord. Not by rank, by force. "The center anticipated resistance," the voice said quietly. "You have shown an unusual attachment to the asset, officer. It has been noted. Stand aside, or you will be relieved of your post, and these proceedings will continue without you." I looked at the soldiers. 8 of them, armored, weapons charged. I looked at the prisoners, 8 of them too, in gray, watching this exchange with the dull resignation of people who had long ago stopped expecting anyone to argue on their behalf. And then I looked at the smallest of them. I had not noticed the child at first. She was at the end of the line, half hidden behind a tall man with a bent back, and she was small, so small, no higher than my waist. A human girl, perhaps 8 of their years, perhaps 9. It is hard for me to judge human ages even now. She had dark hair, matted and dull from the dust, and a thin face, and eyes that were too big for it, the way a child's eyes are when the child has not had enough to eat for too long. She was not looking at the soldiers or the techs or me. She was looking at the glass, at the floor of the dome beyond it, at the great gray shape that lay there near the inner door where it had lain since the night before. She was looking at the Warbeast, and her face had gone very, very still. I did not understand it yet. I thought she was simply afraid, as any child would be afraid, seeing a creature like that for the first time. I almost said something to her, some useless soldier's comfort, but the words died in my throat because the Warbeast had lifted its head. It had lifted its head, and it was looking back at her. I want to tell you about the silence that fell then, because I have never felt another like it. The control room was full of people, full of breathing and the hum of equipment and the low, constant moan of the wind outside, and yet it went silent in a way that had nothing to do with sound. It was the silence of a room where something is happening that no one understands and everyone can feel. The Warbeast rose. It rose to its feet slowly, the way it had risen for the meat the day before, but this was different. The day before there had been hunger in it and caution and the long weariness I had come to know. This was none of those things. This was something I had no name for. The great head was lifted high. The amber eyes were fixed on the child at the end of the line, and the vents along its spine, the ones that pulsed with the residue of that engineered furnace, had begun to glow. "Field integrity," the voice said sharply, and now there was something in his flat voice that had not been there before. "Confirm field integrity." "Field is stable," an engineer reported, his fingers flying. "But the asset's core temperature is rising, fast. I have never seen it climb like this." The Warbeast took a step toward the glass. The soldiers along the wall shifted, weapons coming up. The prisoners drew back, all but the child who had not moved, who stood there at the end of the line with her two big eyes fixed on the creature, and her thin face still as stone. The Warbeast took another step, and another, until it stood pressed against the inside of the containment field, as close as it could come to the glass, as close as it could come to her, and it lowered its great scarred head until it was level with hers, with only the field and the glass between them, and it made a sound. I had heard that creature roar loud enough to crack a panel. I had heard it growl low and deep, a sound you felt in your bones, but I had never heard it make this sound. None of us had. It was soft. It was almost a whine, almost a question, the sound a thing makes when it cannot believe what it is seeing. The sound of something that has been alone for so long it had forgotten there was any other way to be, and has just seen, across an impossible distance, a face it knows. "Officer," the engineer said, and his voice was shaking now. "The core temperature, it is still climbing. If it does not stop, the field will not hold. It is going to come through that glass." "Then stop it," the voice snapped. "Reverse the field, terminate the asset now." "No," I said again, but quieter this time, because I was no longer sure I was speaking to anyone who would listen. The engineer's hands were moving across the controls. I saw the field indicators shift from green toward the red. I knew what was coming. A pulse, the right intensity, and the thing on the other side of the glass would simply stop. Its engineered heart would still. The great amber eyes would go dark, and the soft, terrible, hopeful sound it was making would end forever. And the child would watch it happen. I do not know what I would have done. I have asked myself that question for many years, and I still do not have an honest answer. Whether I would have stopped the engineer's hand, whether I would have been brave enough in that moment to throw away 20 years in my rank and perhaps my life for a weapon and a prisoner child I had known for less than an hour. I would like to tell you that I would have. I am not certain it is true. But I never had to find out, because the child spoke first. She did not shout it. That is the thing I want you to understand, the thing the official reports could never capture, the thing that is the whole reason I am telling you this story at all. She did not scream it or command it or call it out across the room. She said it the way you would say something to someone you love, who is hurting, who is far away, and who you are afraid you have lost. Softly, almost broken, barely more than a breath. She said a single word. And I will tell you what that word was, and what it meant, and what happened in Dome 7 in the seconds after she said it. But you must understand the weight of it first. You must understand that 11 handlers had failed, that 8 phases of the Conquered's finest protocols had failed, that neural commands and chemical agents and suppression drones had all been thrown at this creature and shattered against it, that the entire might of an empire had tried to control the Warbeast and could not. And a starving human child, no higher than my waist, in the gray of the Conquered, did it with one word, spoken so quietly that those of us standing closest almost did not hear it. The engineer's hand froze over the controls. The voice turned slowly, his pale face caught between calculation and something that might, in a creature capable of it, have been fear. The soldiers along the wall did not know whether to aim at the beast or the child, and the Warbeast, pressed against the glass, its core burning hot enough to melt the field, its great head lowered to the level of a little girl's face, went utterly, completely still. The vents along its spine dimmed. The core temperature, the engineer would tell me later, his voice still shaking, began to fall. Not slowly, all at once, as though something inside the creature that had been straining toward an explosion had simply, in the space of a breath, let go. And the Warbeast that no one in the universe could control lay down on the floor of Dome 7, on its side of the glass, as close to the child as it could come, and it rested its great scarred head against the field, and it closed its amber eyes, and it was calm. I have spent my whole life since that morning trying to understand what I saw. I have read what passes for the science of these things. I have spoken to people far cleverer than I am, and I will share what I came to believe in the part of the story that is still to come. But standing in that control room, in that impossible silence, with the wind moaning outside and the Warbeast calm at last, I understood only one thing, and I understood it all the way down to the floor of myself. The Conquered had asked the wrong question from the very beginning. For 2 years, 11 handlers, 8 phases, the whole machinery of an empire, everyone had been asking the same question. How do we control it? How do we make it obey? And not one of them, not one, had ever thought to ask the only question that mattered. What did they take from it? What did they break? And who did it lose, somewhere back in the dark of how it was made, that it had been waiting for, all this time, this whole long time, behind that scarred and weary face? The child was crying now. Silent tears, cutting tracks through the dust on her thin cheeks. She had taken a step out of the line, and no one stopped her, because no one in that room knew any more what the rules were. She walked forward, small and slow, until she stood at the glass on her side of it, with the Warbeast's great calm head resting against the field on the other. She put her small hand against the glass. And the Warbeast, that engine of war, that killer of 11 handlers, that thing the whole empire could not control, opened its eyes and looked at her hand against the glass. And very gently, so gently it seemed impossible for something so vast, it pressed the side of its great scarred face against the same spot from the other side. The voice was staring at the data slate in his hands, as though it had betrayed him. "This is not possible," he said. "There is no prior contact. The records show no prior contact between the asset and any of these subjects. This is not possible." But it was happening, and as I stood there watching it happen, I began, slowly, to understand that the records were wrong. That somewhere in all those black redacted bars, in all the truth the Conquered had buried, there was a connection between the smallest prisoner in that line and the largest weapon in that dome. A connection so old and so deep that it had survived everything the Empire had done to break it. I did not yet know what that connection was. I would learn it in the hours that followed, and the learning of it would change everything I thought I knew, Not just about the Warbeast, but about the conquered and about myself, and about what it truly means to be the strong one in the room. But that is the last part of the story. And before I tell it, I have to tell you what the voice did next. Because the voice was a creature of the conquered to its core, and it had just watched something that its models said was impossible. And there is nothing more dangerous in the universe than a servant of an empire who has just seen the impossible and decided he would rather destroy it than understand it. He set down his data slate. He turned to the squad of soldiers along the wall, and in that flat, quiet, terrible voice, he gave an order. "Remove the child," he said, "and resume the termination." "Remove the child," the voice said, "and resume the termination." The soldiers moved. I have replayed the next few seconds more times than I can count, and they never play the same way twice in my memory, because they happened faster than memory is built to hold. Two of the armored soldiers stepped forward toward the child. The engineer's hands went back to the field controls, the indicators sliding toward the red. And the child, the little girl with her hand still pressed against the glass, turned her head and looked at the soldiers coming for her, and she was not afraid. That is the thing I remember most clearly. She was not afraid. A starving prisoner child, 8 years old, with 2 armored soldiers bearing down on her, and there was no fear in her face at all. There was only a kind of certainty, the certainty of someone who knows something the rest of the room does not. She looked at the soldiers, then she looked back at the Warbeast, and she spoke the word again. Louder this time, not a command, a reminder, a promise. "Ember," she said. That was the word. That was the single word that the whole Empire's protocols had never thought to try, because it was not in any of their files, because they had erased it from every record they kept. A name. The beast's name. Ember. And the Warbeast came through the glass. I do not mean it broke the glass in a rage. I want to be very precise about this because it matters, because it is the whole difference between the story the conquered wanted to tell and the truth. It did not rampage. It did not roar. It rose, and it put its great shoulder against the containment field, and the field, which it held against suppression drones and core temperature spikes, and everything the Empire could throw at it, simply gave way, folding around that massive gray shape like water around a stone. The reinforced glass cracked, then shattered, and the Warbeast stepped through the ruin of its cage onto the floor of the control room, and the entire weight of an engineered war engine was loose among us. The soldiers froze. Of course they froze. There is a thing that happens to even the bravest fighter when the impossible walks toward him, a kind of locking of the limbs, and every soldier in that room felt it. Weapons came up but did not fire. The voice was backing toward the rear access, his pale face for once showing exactly what it felt, which was terror. And the Warbeast walked through all of it as though none of it existed. It walked past the soldiers it could have killed in a heartbeat. It walked past me, close enough that I felt that engineered heat wash over me, close enough that I could have touched it, and it did not so much as glance at me. It walked to the child. And it lowered its great scarred head, and the little girl wrapped both her thin arms around as much of that head as she could reach, and she pressed her face against it, and the Warbeast that no one in the universe could control stood absolutely still and let a child hold it. The 2 soldiers who had been sent to take her had stopped a few steps away. They were looking at me. Everyone left standing in that room was looking at me, because I was the ranking officer, because the moment had to break one way or another, and they were waiting to see which way I would break it. The voice found his voice again from the safety of the doorway. "Officer Voth, order them to fire. That asset is loose and uncontained. Give the order." I looked at the Warbeast, with the child in its arms. I looked at the soldiers, fingers on their triggers, waiting. And I made the choice that ended my career in the conquered and saved what was left of my soul. "Lower your weapons," I said. "Officer Voth." I said lower them. I stepped forward between the soldiers and the child and the beast into the line of fire, because that is the only place an honest man can stand when the firing is wrong. Nobody fires in this dome. That is an order, and it is the last one I will ever give you that I am sure is right. For a moment that stretched out long as a year, nobody moved. The soldiers looked at me and at the voice, and at the impossible thing standing in the middle of the room. And then, one by one, they lowered their weapons. Not because they trusted me. I think because, somewhere underneath the armor and the training, they were as tired of the conquered as I was, and they had just been handed a reason to put their guns down, and they took it. The voice understood that he had lost the room. I saw it cross his face. And then he turned and fled through the rear access, and we let him go, because there were more important things in that room than chasing him. I turned to the child. She had loosened her grip on the Warbeast's head, and she was looking at me now, those two big eyes steady and unafraid. And I knelt down in front of her so that we were closer to the same height, the way you should when you speak to a child, the way I had not known to do until that morning. "How do you know him?" I said. Not it, him. I had stopped saying it somewhere in the last few minutes, and I would never go back. And she told me. The story came out of her in pieces, in the simple flat way that children tell the most terrible things, because they have not yet learned which things are supposed to be too heavy to say plainly. She had been born in the program, the same program that had made the Warbeast. The Conquered had not only built its weapons in those facilities, it had also kept the families of the Conquered there, as labor, as test subjects, as leverage. Her mother had worked in the pens where the young beasts were raised, cleaning, feeding, the work no conquered hand would do. And the child had grown up there in the dark and the noise of that place, with no other children to play with. Only the beasts. She had been very small, she said, when she first crawled into the pen of the last surviving young one. Too small to know she should be afraid. And the beast had been small then too by its kind, barely larger than she was, and frightened, and alone, and the two of them had found each other in the dark of that terrible place the way only the very young and the very lonely can. She had fed it scraps from her own ration. She had slept curled against its side when the nights in the facility went cold. And she had given it a name, because everything she loved had to have a name, and the techs only ever called it by its number, and a number is no name for a friend. She had called it Ember, because of the way its spine glowed faint and warm in the dark of the pen, because in a place with no light and no kindness, it had been the one warm thing. And then the Conquered had taken it away, pulled it from the pen one day to begin its weapon training, and erased every record of where it had come from and who it had known, because a weapon with a past is harder to use than a weapon without one. The child had not seen it again in years. She had been moved from facility to facility, from labor camp to labor camp, until she ended up in the gray line of prisoners on this dust-blown world. On the morning, a transport brought a Warbeast that no one could control to Dome 7. She had recognized it the instant she saw it through the glass, and it had recognized her. I understood then what the Conquered's records had gotten wrong and why. There had been prior contact, years of it, the deepest kind there is. The Empire had simply erased it. The way it erased everything inconvenient, and in erasing it they had buried the one thing that could have controlled the Warbeast all along. Not commands, not chemicals, not pain. A name spoken by someone who loved it. A name that meant, I remember you. I remember what you were before they made you into this. And under all the scars and all the killing and all the years, you are still that. You are still mine, and I am still yours, and you are not alone. That is what the single word meant. That is what no one in the entire Conquered had ever thought to offer a weapon, because the Conquered did not believe its weapons were the kind of thing you offered anything to. The humans were different. I learned that in the end from a starving child on a dust-blown world. The humans, even the smallest of them, even the most broken, looked at a thing the Empire called a weapon and saw a someone. And that seeing, that simple stubborn refusal to look at a living creature and see only a tool, turned out to be a stronger force than every gun in that room. I will tell you quickly how it ended, because the long part of the story is over, and what remains is only the shape of what came after. We did not stay on that world. By the time the voice reached anyone who would listen, half the depot already knew that an officer had defied a termination order, and the other half were too tired of the conquered to care which way it went. There were more of us than the Empire liked to admit in those last years, soldiers who had seen too much and believed too little. When I walked out of Dome 7 with the child beside me and the Warbeast behind us, I did not walk out alone. Dren Kal fell in beside me without a word, then the two soldiers who had lowered their weapons, then more. We took a ship. I will not say how, because some of the people who helped us are still alive, and the conquered, what is left of it, has a long memory. We took the prisoners, all of them, every gray-clad figure I had spent years not looking at, and we took them off that world, and the Warbeast came with us, walking up the ramp of its own accord, with the child's small hand resting on its flank. It never harmed another living thing after that day. The killer of 11 handlers, the weapon an empire could not control, lived out the rest of its years as gentle as the dawn, and it did so for one reason and one reason only. It had been given back the thing they took from it. It had a name again, and it had the one who gave it. The child is grown now. She has children of her own. The Warbeast lived a long time, longer than the Conquered's techs ever thought it could, and when at last it died in the sun, on a green world far from any war, with its great scarred head in the lap of the woman who had once been a starving child in a pen in the dark. I was there. I am glad I was there. And I have thought in all the years since about strength, about what it really is. The Conquered believed strength was the power to make things obey. It built an empire on that belief, and it built weapons like the one in Dome 7, and it spent 11 handlers in 2 years and the whole weight of its protocols trying to control a creature it had broken, and it failed, because it had never once understood what strength actually is. I learned what it is from a child. I learned it in the space of a single word. The strongest thing I ever saw was not the Warbeast that could tear apart a squad of drones without breaking stride. It was a starving little girl, with 2 armored soldiers bearing down on her, who looked at the most dangerous creature in the universe and did not see a weapon to be feared or a tool to be used. She saw a friend she had lost, and she called him by his name. So when people ask me, as they sometimes do, how it was that no one in the whole Conquered could control the Warbeast, but a human child did it with a single word, I tell them the truth. She never controlled him at all. She loved him, and it turns out that, in the end, that is the only thing in the whole wide universe that no weapon was ever built to withstand.